Do you count me down or do I just? Yeah. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of February. It's just after 5:30. I'd like to welcome all the members that are here this evening and all of those watching on the webcast now or sometime in the future. We have no apologies for absence or substitutions. So the first agenda item is declarations of interest. Have any members got any declaration of interest not already registered with the authority? Councillor Fisher.
Just for transparency, since we're dealing with code of conduct and standards, joint standards, I should say that I'm involved in the standards case at the moment.
Thank you very much. No others? No, thank you. Agenda item 2 is public participation. We have one speaker who's with us this evening. It's Mr. Andy Mendes. If you'd like to take your seat, Andy. And let me just get my stopwatch up. Stopwatch. There we go. So, as you know, you have 3 minutes. Have you got your mic on?
I have.
Marvellous. Start whenever you'd like.
Okay. Hello again, still. First on the Constitution and independence, you'll be amazed to know. I've not had any feedback on my written comments on independent members and see no changes in the draft Constitution published last week. I would ask you today to consider 3 points and to insist on changes. I guess it's your very last chance. First, make it 2 independents for audit and governance, not 1. But at least it's good to know that the legal obstacle to having an independent on a financial committee seems to have been overcome. How? Secondly, leave open the option for 2 4-year terms. You'll appreciate, having been on ANG for however long you are, that it takes time to understand ANG's role. Removing a member after 4 years makes no sense to me. And thirdly, please seek democratic oversight of appointments to the Independent Remuneration Committee, not just a rubber stamp at full council for names apparently produced out of the ether. There's no reference as to how they get selected. So on Veritar in the Constitution, in Article 23, it states, the council designates the following posts: Head of Internal Audit, Chief Executive of Veritar, a company part owned by the council. And then Appendix 10A says, the council's audit and fraud provider is a wholly owned authority, a wholly local authority-owned company, Veritar, in which the council has 2 director appointments, the CFO and a member of the executive. So the proposed constitution actually embeds Veritar within the council's being. Now, I was on ANG when we debated the extension of Veritar's contract. It turned out for 10 years, from 2020 to 2030. So surely this pseudo-commercial arrangement shouldn't be written into the constitution at this time. They are an independent or semi-independent business. So moving on to the final statement of accounts, I note a significant increase in misstatements in the council's accounts compared with previous years. I'd be interested in both Mark and Debbie's views on whether this reflects a pattern across local authorities on the back of COVID, or is a specific failure within COIC's new setup, or something else, I guess. And then finally, on the annual governance statement and monitoring officers reports, I was disappointed to see no contrition, which is obviously the word of the week, in either the annual government statement or the monitoring officers report about the PIR findings. Now, while these relate to 2019-20, the report was not published until April 2021. Surely ANG, on behalf of elected members and of the senior officers, should accept responsibility for the failings now, not simply report on the expenditure they're incurring in response. Would an apology be out of place? But in a further parallel with national life, it's good to see the annual governance statement from the leader and COO concluding, it is our opinion that the council's governance arrangements in 2020-21 were sound and provide a robust platform for achieving the council's priorities and challenges in 2021-22. Now,
can you think about winding up?
Yes. This is indeed my positive note to finish, because you'd hard to think of two men peculiarly better qualified to make these statements than the Chief Operating Officer and the Leader of the Council. So I'll leave you with that to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Certainly we will be covering a number of the points that you've made, and Mr. Mendes, would you be prepared to submit the comments to the monitoring officer or to myself in respect of your thoughts on the Constitution? Yeah.
Okay, so I did send them to the monitoring officer, the CFO, and to you and Tony about 10 days, fortnight ago. Not heard anything from any of you. Be very happy to resubmit them, and you've got my text from tonight. I'll happily put those back to all of you again.
Yes, yeah. If you could copy it into the to the monitoring officer who will be collating them. Is that okay? Thank you. Excellent. People may be surprised why agenda item 2 was public participation and not the minutes. It's because the minutes of the last meeting haven't been prepared because it was an emergency meeting only held a fortnight ago. So they will be coming to our March meeting. So we then move to agenda item 3, and for colleagues will be aware that there were 2 agendas. The Constitution was sent a week early, and this is in our supplement, which was published on time. And that is the PSAA review of external audit fees. And I believe Debbie is going to speak to that. Debbie?
Yeah, just a brief introduction, Chair. So this report outlines the process that the Council will need to undertake in order to appoint our external auditors for the 5-year period from 2023-24 onwards. The report outlines various options, their advantages and disadvantages, and concludes that it would be advisable to again join the national PSAA-led procurement, as that we feel gives the best opportunity to secure value for money, given the national issues with audit that in part have led to the Redmond review. And in terms of the next steps, this report, I think, Janie, will be included in February full council alongside the budget papers, and that's so that we can notify PSAA of our intention to participate, assuming that that's agreed by full council by the required deadline of March 2022.
Thank you. That was the question I was going to ask, because it says on paragraph 5 that we have to notify them by the 11th of March. Now, just correct me, but my understanding was that Budget Council can only deal with budget issues. Is that not correct?
No, Chair, if I may, there is provision in the Constitution that allows other items of business, if necessary, to be brought to Budget Council. It's also felt that because this is around the appointment of external auditors for the future, it is linked with delivery of the budget. And so therefore, on this extraordinary basis, it will be an agenda item in February.
Lovely. Thank you. Questions? There are none. So we have a, do we have a recommendation here? Basically that we support the idea of this going to full council with a view to joining the national procurement. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. I've looked through the evidence and it's clear that that is the right course of action in my opinion. So I'll move that we recommend to full council that we join the PSAA system.
I'm happy to take that on the nod. Are everybody content with that, to go to full council? Thank you. So we then move to agenda item 4, which is the Mazars audit completion report. Our friends from Mazars are joining us via audio. They're not physically here this evening. And so can I just clarify, Mark Kirkham and Mark Outerside, are you here and can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you fine, Chair. It's Mark Kirkham here.
Fantastic. In which case, could you open your report?
Yes, thank you very much for that, Chair. Item 4 is our audit completion report. It sets out the findings of the work that we carried out in relation to the council's accounts for 2021, and also the work that we carry out on the value for money arrangements the council had in 2021. The executive summary, page 5 of our report, sets out the principal conclusions and significant findings. It refers to the status of our audit. At the time we prepared this report, there were some procedures that were outstanding in addition to our routine closure procedures, the final file review, which I've yet to carry out, and members will be able to see the anticipated conclusions that we've got on page 13 of your agenda pack, which include an unqualified opinion on the financial statements and a qualified part of our audit report referring to value for money arrangements because of the significant deficiencies that we identified and reported in our public interest report. And Mark Outerside, as you said, is always on the call to take us through the remainder of the report, principally to make sure that members are aware of the findings that we reached in connection with the significant audit risks that we reported to Audit and Governance Committee when we presented our audit plan. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. I think everybody can hear.
Grand. So in usual form, I don't propose to turn all the pages on the report and take it as read, but I will highlight those areas that Mark referenced. So report, it does confirm that there's been no changes to our planned approach. Materiality increased slightly to 8.95 million, which was based on the final version of the accounts. And it's also worth noting that we will report any errors over £268,000 to the committee. Section 4 of our report, which are pages 11 to 16, provide an update on the work we completed to address the significant risks highlighted in our audit plan that was taken to this committee back in March 2021. And there's no significant issues that have been noted, although I'd like to draw your attention to pages 13 and 14, which provide some additional narrative on the work we have completed on the valuations of property and pensions. On page...
Could you just repeat those two pages?
It's page 13 and 14 of our report. I don't know whether the report pack's slightly different.
I think it's 20, it might be 20 and 21. Yeah, 21 and 22 of our pack. Sorry, carry on, please.
It's all right, thank you. So I'm going to try and use my brain here. So on page 23, we comment on the qualitative aspects of the accounts and highlight the significant matters we discussed with management during the audit. Those being accounting for COVID-19 business support income, accounting for the collection fund deficit, additional regulatory scrutiny in regard to valuations, the valuation of Allerton Waste Recycling Centre, and the public interest report that was issued in April 2021. Page 24 also provides an explanation of the modification to our audit opinion, which is linked to the value for money commentary. Page 19 of our report includes the control recommendations noted as part of our work on the IT general controls work. And on the following page, there is an update to prior control recommendations. And you will note that we have made some follow-up recommendations in regard to property valuations. Section 6 of the report lists our misstatements that we have found as part of this year's audit. On page 22 of our report, you will note 2 unadjusted errors above performance materiality, which have not been changed in the accounts. We will require these to be listed by in the management representation letter. The following pages list the adjustments that have been made, 3 of which relate to accountant treatment as set out in SIFTA's year-end bulletin, which have not been applied to the draft accounts but have been subsequently amended. And the 4th was a simple transposition error, where business rates arrears had mistakenly been included in creditors and since moved to the debtors figure. And then the following page, page 25 of our report, confirms disclosure adjustments. And I'd like you to note the one at the bottom in regard to contingent liabilities, which has not been updated in the accounts. Section 7 provides our update on the council's value for money arrangements. Page 29 confirms that we've identified a significant weakness and made a recommendation, which reflects the public interest report issued in April 2021. And then the following page, page 30 of our report, is management's response to this. At this stage, we'd like to point out that we have not completed our work in this area, and per the National Audit Officer's guidance, we will report this within 3 months of signing the audit opinion of the accounts. We will therefore not be able to make further comment on this until our work is complete. The appendices to our report includes our proposed management representation letter and our draft audit opinion, which I think is now being included in the accounts. And I would also like you to note that we've not received group instructions from the National Audit Office for the completion of our value from whole of government accounts work, which we normally complete as part of the audit. This means that we will not be able to issue the audit certificate until we've completed the WGA work and the value for money work is completed. So I don't plan to say any more other than to thank Debbie and the finance team and to take any questions about the report.
Thank you both, Mark and Mark. I shall just open it to questions from members. Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. I am looking at page 15 of the Mazars report, page 23 of our packs, section 4. There's just something I just don't understand in the second paragraph under qualitative aspects of the council's accounting practices. It infers that something that is in the SITFA bulletin hasn't been actioned. So what needs to happen now? And what impact does that have on the accounts as they stand?
Thank you, Councillor Lomax. Essentially, what it was is every year SITFA issues the year-end bulletin, and it has some key issues relating to the year. At the time of the draft accounts, they hadn't been actioned, and those are the adjusted errors that we've included in the report on page, you've got me thinking, page 23 and 24 of our report. So they have been actioned and have been updated in the final version of the accounts.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Mark, on the same page, a little bit further down, Council Tax Collection Fund Surplus Deficits 2021. Could you just talk me through that first paragraph a little bit, please? Just sort of explain what it is, when it'll happen, and sort of, I know on page 31 of our report, which is 23 of yours, I think it goes into a bit more detail around that, but I was wondering if you could just talk me through that a little bit more, please.
I will try my very best because it is quite a complex area of the accounts, hence the SITFA bulletin.
Thank you.
Debbie can jump in anytime she likes on this one, as can Emma. But essentially, the council received additional funding for the for any sort of shortfall in income around council tax and business rates, which ultimately ended up with you receiving income in advance. And the SITFA bulletin was very prescriptive about how that should be treated, meaning that it should have been allocated to a reserve as opposed to a provision, which led to one of the corrections listed on pages 23 and 24.
Thank you. Debbie, is there anything you want to? No, that's fine. Can I have another question, Chair, if that's all right? Thank you. I don't intend to go over the PIR in too much detail, because obviously we've covered that in great detail many times, and it will come up later on. But for me, it's just sort of because this is obviously working a year sort of behind. I'm thinking ahead to next year. Obviously, there's work ongoing to address the issues that were raised due to the PIR. I'm wondering what the audit will look like next year. Will it be mentioned? Will it highlight whether things have been achieved or not? I was thinking, is there going to be a sort of specific section moving forward, or how will it look?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Webb. It's Mark Kirkham here, just responding to that. The audit for 21-22 will take into account the progress that the council's made in responding to the recommendations that we made in April. So it would be part of the audit, and it would be unfair of me to say how that would be described in advance of what we find.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much.
Councillor Lomas.
I am looking at page 19 of your report, page 27 of our packs, the internal control recommendations. And I'm a bit perplexed. I was a bit confused reading this because at our last meeting, we talked about disaster recovery processes, and it may be that I misunderstood, or it may be that actually things were put into place after this was written. But I certainly got the notion, again, I may have misunderstood it from our last meeting, that actually there were comprehensive disaster relief recovery processes in place. So I'm curious about this one because it doesn't seem to gel with other conversations.
I picked up on that as well. Mark, do you have an opinion on why you came to that conclusion?
It was around the, I think it was more around being able to demonstrate that it was actually in place. So it's not saying that it wasn't, but it was giving us the evidence to be able to back that one away and say that the disaster recovery arrangements were in place.
Thank you. I just wondered whether you wanted to ask Debbie.
I was just about to ask Debbie and Janie if they have any comment on that.
I'm not very close to it. My understanding is, as Mark said, is that there is a system, there is something in place. It's just that, and I can't recall, Mark, when you actually did this audit work, because it was probably some time ago, and that they just weren't able to evidence it. And as you can see in the management responses, that there is some work to do an annual kind of exercise to test it, and I think that was the part that there were arrangements and processes, but we haven't tested them. So it's great to have a business continuity plan, isn't it? But if you don't kind of give it a run through and make sure it works, and I think that's perhaps the bit that Mazars had picked up as well. It's, you know, it's all very well and good having one. Have you checked that it works? And so I think that was the bit that was missing. So as part of that management response, that work is going to be done. So we can bring an update on that. I can check that with IT.
I've got a couple of questions, Mark. Just on that page, whilst we're just talking on internal control recommendations, and this is an issue for Debbie and Janie. Have the new members' allowances, the 2019 ones, been put on the website now, the correct version?
Yes.
There they are. Right, cool. Can I ask you, Mark, you've made reference to some unadjusted misstatements. How significant are they, and to what extent do they give you any concern?
Neither of them give me any concern. Both of the errors were extrapolations, which is audit terminology for we found an error and we extrapolated across the population. So it would be really unfair of us to ask Debbie and Emma to adjust for something that's an extrapolated error. And because it was below our performance materiality level, it's just a reporting issue to say, look, we found this, we're not that concerned, management aren't adjusting for it. But we do report it to you because it was over the £268,000.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you. Plant and equipment at Allerton Waste. You've made reference to that in respect to the depreciation and assets and plant and machinery being incorporated into other land and buildings. Is that normal, and are you satisfied with the response that you got as
Yes,
to why it was as it is?
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, we're satisfied with the response. So basically, in simple terms, if you imagine a building like your house, you've got your roof, your windows, and the main structure.
Yeah.
And and what you see in these instances, the different elements are depreciated because they have a different life. So your windows would last 10 years, but the structure might last 60. So what Emma's team did was demonstrate to us that it wasn't materially different if they did it on that more granular basis. Yeah. So yes, it's being done as it is, and just keep an eye on it, basically. Good. Make sure it doesn't run away with itself.
Good. And final couple of questions. You're not able to complete at the moment. Do you have any sort of timeline as to when you are going to be in a position to sign this off?
So in terms of, I think the file is ready to go now. So once we get the signed accounts, we'll do the close steps, and we'll be able to do that for you.
Fantastic. Excellent. That's good to know. And just one last question, which I suspect, given the financial state that most local authorities are in, do you have any concerns about the financial resilience of City of York Council? I was just talking with Debbie earlier about the SIPFA Resilience Index that's just come out. Have you seen that, and does that give you any concerns?
Hello, Chair, it's Mark Kirkham again. Yes, we're aware of the index. As you'll note from the audit completion report, we have got some further work to do before we formally bring all of our work for 2021 to a close, and that includes updating our assessment of value for money arrangements, specifically in relation to the arrangements for ensuring the financial sustainability of budgets and services at the council. So we're not going to be offering a view on that.
No, that's fine. So are there any final questions? No. I'd like to thank you both, Marks, for all your time that you've put into this, the diligence in which you've prepared this report, and for all your help. By all means, stay for the rest of the meeting if you'd like to, but if you do want to go, then you have our thanks, and we'll see you again later on in the year.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we now move to agenda item 5, which is the annual financial report statement of accounts. And I'm going to hand over to Debbie.
Yeah. So as part of the audit completion report that you've just been through with Mazars, that has highlighted everything that's changed between the draft accounts that you last saw and this version, and Emma's included. I know it's not very easy to see in the printed pack, but if you looked at it on screen, we've highlighted exactly where all the changes are so that you could cross-reference those. So there's nothing else that you haven't already seen and already discussed. The only other perhaps area to draw to your attention, and Janie might want to comment on, is the annual governance statement, where format has changed slightly, and Janie's also included an addendum just to reflect that it's a live document, and just to kind of keep that up to date. So you're now being asked to recommend that myself and the chair formally kind of sign and approve the accounts, and then they'll get published on the website, and we'll start this year's accounts, and the cycle continues.
Just like the fourth row page. That's fantastic, thank you. So we've got the formal statement of accounts, but we've also got the governance statement now. So I'm going to hand over to Janie to introduce that section, if she would.
Chair, I've worked with Debbie and Emma and other key officers across the council, and formulated this year's annual governance statement, which supports the statement of accounts. And as Debbie's already referenced, because this is a living document, there is an addendum that's attached to it, which is on page 239 of the agenda. The draft annual governance statement was already included, has previously been to committee as part of the draft accounts, and I can confirm that in that particular document, nothing has changed. The updates are literally in the addendum report at page 239. And the cut-off date for that was 18th of January, which is the time I had to submit papers for publication of this. As Debbie's indicated, we have made a conscious decision to change the format of it this year to hopefully make it more informative in terms of how the Sit for Solace good governance framework, which is the circle diagram on page 209, which is nationally recognised, is applied across the council. And the new page that members may feel is helpful this year is page 210. So it shows the different roles and aspects of how we approach governance and the different roles and responsibilities that each key officer has. So that is a new addition. We have included quite substantial details on the public interest report, which obviously you'll appreciate we are required to do. And I'm happy to take any questions. Oh, sorry, just to mention as well, on page 235, we did include the response to and the recovery from the coronavirus pandemic, which is clearly going to remain a living position and a very fluid position as the sort of situation progresses nationally. But Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Janie. So as members will recall, we did look at the draft accounts. And we also looked at the original version of the annual governance statement in, remind me, October? November. We looked at it in November. But notwithstanding that, I will open it to any questions on either element, mix and match, or just focus on one area if you'd like to. Councillor Webb.
Thank you. Janie, on page 229, which is a table, and it's progress on the previous annual governance statements. Local plan. In the final column, progress made during 2020-21, clearly the council is not in control of the process and there remains risks with the adoption of the plan and the associated timetable. I was just wondering, from a governance point of view, how do we have an influence on that? How can we control things within that? What particularly from a governance point of view are you concerned about there?
Chair, if I may, the concern is that the council does need a local plan, and it is not yet finalised. I think it's this week that details around the inquiry are published and greater time frame. So for me, from a governance perspective, it's the absence of a confirmed local plan, which is an issue. So it's always going to be an update here because we are progressing. I think it just shows you how living this document is because it's already out of date because there's further details being published this week. And have been, sorry. Time has moved on. And so it's the concern is the lack of a local plan rather than the process, in effect. I am reassured, however, just to add, we do have a local plan working group. Members are consulted. It's got the oversight of corporate director of place. So I'm satisfied that the correct levels of seniority are overseeing the process. Details have been published today. And so I'm satisfied around that. It's just the absence of a confirmed local plan, which is an issue.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you very much, Chair. Clearly, this is a matter of concern, but it is one of our key corporate risks. It's, if we actually review the key corporate risk, that was one we looked at, and the implications of not having a local plan were assessed there. I mean, let's hope that the hearings go well and we actually have a local plan ready for adoption by hopefully the end of the year or early next year.
Thank you. So there were just a couple of questions I had. Sorry, Ashley, did you have your hand up? I completely missed you.
I put it up probably after you started looking at me. Really boring questions and actually nothing to do with the content of the report.
Boring's good.
But
Audit and governance.
From an accessibility point of view, I just wondered if we can get rid of the things at the bottom, the building outlines, because they're quite, when you're reading a big paragraph where it all runs through it, it's not very accessible. And I just wondered in terms of font, it seems tiny font in here and smaller than all the kind of standard City of York stuff like agendas and minutes. And I just wondered why. I mean, obviously I get for finance tables, you want to squeeze it all in, but for just kind of free text and paragraphs.
Yeah, there's no real reason other than that. There's a lot of information to get into quite a small space, and we've always assumed that people look at it electronically and therefore would zoom it to whatever size was required. But absolutely take on board the comments, and we'll rectify that for next year.
Yeah, I think actually it makes it almost easier to make it bigger if it's electronic, because it's not costing you the printage.
Councillor Fisher.
The Mazars report was murder for me to read, because when you blow it up, bits disappear off the edge,
Yeah, it was
whereas
quite-
it doesn't reformat.
yeah.
It's really difficult. It's just when you have sight problems, and I still have.
Actually, I think that's a really good point. Could you raise that, because the text was incredibly small, even when I was trying to
Yeah.
read it from the hard copy.
It's quite difficult to read on screen as well.
Yeah.
Mazars one, yeah. So yeah, no, we'll pick that up with the marks. Yeah.
Can I ask colleagues, the new format that Janie's put in, the monitoring officers put in from pages 209, 210. I found it quite helpful, but it is new, and it might be worth just having some comment as to, are you happy with this type of format moving forward in future years? Did people find it straightforward? Was it understandable? Yeah, I think I'm getting nods there. So, so it seems to have worked. So, if there aren't any questions about the accounts nor about the governance statement, I think we now just need to agree to approve this statement of accounts, which I will sign when you tell me to sign it. Yeah. So next time I'm in, stick it under my nose and I will sign it. So we're positively running through this. We did agree it. I thought that's what we agreed. Sorry, did we agree it? I was just taking it on the nod. I think if anybody was opposed to it, they would have just told me. All right. Yeah, does everybody agree? Yes, thank you. Fantastic. Now, I forgot to say right at the beginning about whether we should have a break. So what I will say is, although we are skipping through this, if people do want a break, just somebody give me the nod. Yes, maybe before we get to the Constitution then. Agenda item 6 is the annual monitoring officer's statement.
Chair, if I may.
You may.
The members of the committee have already seen the annual report of the monitoring officer as it appears at page 257, as this was written to support the draft annual governance statement at the time. Again, just like the annual governance statement, this is, in my view, a living document, and therefore I provide a supplementary update and the correction from the issues that you raised last time you looked at it at page 271, with the correction appearing on page 272. In my professional opinion, it is good practice for the monitoring officer to provide an annual report on the governance framework for the council, and the contents of the monitoring officer's annual report supplement the information which is in the annual governance statement, so they should be read together. My report has been shared with Audit and Accounts by virtue of this agenda item. Again, they saw the draft in November as well, and Chair, I'm happy to take any comments, any questions, sorry.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Phrase of the night, this is a living document, and it's already out. There's a couple of bits that I think are out of date. So on 263, the People Directorate's corporate management, I was wondering if that sort of needs to outline the changes yet again to the management structure. Because I think that's obviously happened as of yesterday, hasn't it?
Chair, so I had to write the update, and the cut-off point of the 24th of January.
I'm not in any way, shape or form blaming you. I'm just saying.
However, absolutely right. The commentary around the decision made by SMU actually falls into this year's accounts.
Yeah.
that Debbie's just alluded to. So it will feature in this year's annual governance statement and this year's monitoring officer report. And obviously now I need to do some corrections in when we come to it, Chair, in the Constitution, because the Constitution was written
It does.
prior to SMU yesterday, and you all received it prior to SMU yesterday. So I need to alter those sections of the Constitution as well. So I think everything that I've provided to the committee this evening is living document and is already out of date.
On the same note, on 272 in the supplementary update, the more living version of the living document that's finally dead. The members' code of conduct, about halfway down, Joint Standards Committee holding a further meeting on the 24th of January. I was just wondering if we could get an update.
I've spoken to the chair, and actually the update in respect of that features in the conversation around the Constitution. But Chair, I'm happy to give an update now for this item, or
Yeah, but it was going to be covered. It is one of the amendments. Yeah.
yeah, because it significantly alters the report that the updates that I have from Joint Standards Committee significantly alter the covering report for the Constitution, and I have previously discussed this with the chair. Sorry.
You have. Yes, thank you. Is that? Yeah. Are there any other questions for the monitoring officer? No. In that case, so there's nothing that needs further amending for this one. So that's accepted, I think. Yes. Yes. So we then move to agenda item 7, which is the progress against the action plan prepared in response to the public interest report. And again, I think I'm referring now to Jenny.
Chair, this is another sort of slightly out of date.
Yes,
I do apologise, members, but this is also sort of slightly out of date, but it's also a little bit of duplication. Please forgive me, but it was an item on the work plan, so it was appropriate for me to report. But we have brought the Council's Constitution in its draft bigger form for this evening's meeting, and it does feature as a separate agenda item. So if I may comment at that point rather than now. Again, you've just referenced the procedures around the Joint Standards Committee, which is on page 276. If I may just add the updates for the Constitution item rather than now. In respect, these are the two major actions now which just need to progress in terms of the public interest report recommendations. And then after that, we have got to start looking at, subject to full council's approval or not of the Constitution in March, embedding and training and awareness raising around the various facets of the recommendations. And because we've already got the exit strategy guidance, working with Helen on that, and it's just about raising awareness and getting a good culture embedded, and because obviously you've got the LGA reporting in the summer, and that will be the next step in terms of where are we up to in the public interest report. Subject, I don't want to preempt the outcome of full council, however, or your discussion later this evening.
No. And for the benefit of colleagues and those watching, the LGA have sent a letter through with a list of additional issues and questions, I believe.
Yes, they did. As indicated on the last occasion, we hadn't heard whether the LGA consented to the questions being circulated.
Yeah.
They have now, and they have been circulated. They relate just any clarification, because there's again extremely tiny type that they sent them in, and it's not obvious to which they're referring to. But members will recall in July that we circulated our action plan in terms of responding to the recommendations, which is much more broken down, and their questions relate to that broken down schedule, but it's what we published in July. So that's the premise of what they're working to at the moment. But yes, I have now circulated those.
And you've circulated that to all members of this committee?
Yes, and also,
I didn't know if it had just come to me, that was all.
No,
Good.
I'm sure it's gone to, yes, people are nodding, so yes.
Yeah. Good. Yes, lovely. And yes, they are going to be reporting back to us sometime in the summer when we get to the work plan, which is only up until the end of this financial year. we need to factor in a confirmed
Yes.
date with them, with their agreement.
Yes, the 6-month window, Chair, is
Yeah.
around June, July-ish.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So in terms of the work that they're asking of Debbie and I, we're kind of working on that sort of timeframe. We've also ensured that the LGA has got access to ask any questions of Helen Whiting, who's our new head of HR.
Okay.
We've also made sure that Howie Ainscoe have got the contact details for local government ombuds for the local government peer team. And so
have they had a meeting?
The peer team.
And Howie Ainscoe?
I don't know, because I don't think I need to know,
Okay,
Chair. I think if it's the LGA wants to speak to Howie Ainscoe, as long as we've provided the mechanism and the framework for them to have an open dialogue, but everybody is aware that they can contact each other.
Yeah.
And I think they should be able to do that independently of us. So we've provided all the contact details. Likewise, the LGA has got the contact details for Mark and Mark as well, so that they can make their own independent inquiries.
Cool, excellent. Fantastic. So is everybody happy with that? And then at that stage, I think we will now just factor in a short break before we go to agenda item 8, which is the review of the council's constitution. Is that okay? 10 minutes? 10 minutes? 10 minutes. Thank you, everybody, and welcome back. This is part 2 of Audit and Governance, 2nd of February. We now move on to agenda item 8, which is a review of the Council's constitution. So I'm going to hand over to Jamie, I think. Yes, lovely.
Thank you, Chair. At the request of Audit and Governance Committee, this section of the agenda was printed early, hence the reason why the remainder of the agenda is a supplement, even though that was printed on time.
Yeah.
If I may just focus members' attention to the covering report for the Constitution, because it's already been alluded to in this meeting, there's a few updates that I need to give. So firstly, in respect of Joint Standards Committee, as members are aware, Joint Standards Committee met on the 24th of January. They've been undertaking work following the support of the LGA model code. They've been undertaking their work to look at the procedures which support the implementation of the model code. They have now confirmed with Hoey Ainscough the content of those model procedures in terms of how to manage a complaint. For example, FAQs that go to people who are the subject of a complaint or to people who want to make a complaint. There's a couple of amendments which the committee has asked Hoey Ainscough to adopt, and once those are received back and the chair and the vice chair have approved them, they will be inserted into the constitution and replace the existing procedures. As indicated on the report as well, it's been a long-standing position that the Joint Standards Committee did not want any substitutes for their members, because they wanted a consistency of approach in terms of their work on the ethical governance framework. However, at the meeting on the 24th of January, there is a reflection that the volume of work that is now undertaken by that committee, and also an instance where an assessment subcommittee did require the attendance of a substitute, they've now changed their position. In fact, they do support substitutes being appointed to Joint Standards Committee members. So that section on page 4 of my agenda at the bottom for Article 7,
yeah,
where it says draft wording to be approved, it's the final column, that will be amended going forward because that is no longer the position of the committee. What I will add in there, however, is that Joint Standards Committee have asked for the parish council representatives to also have the ability to appoint a substitute. Therefore, annual council will be asked to appoint or to provide for the provision of parish councillors on the Joint Standards Committee to have the ability to appoint a substitute. And discussions will be undertaken with York Association of Local Councils. I apologise, I probably said that the wrong way around. Yes, I knew I would. About what arrangements. The Joint Standards Committee, the reason for it being joint is that there is a legal agreement to work. It's a joint committee with parish councils, and so therefore we have to work with the YLC. The York Local Councils Association in terms of the appointment of substitutes for the parish council members.
Yes, please.
Could I also ask that you try to make sure that you also
Can you speak up?
sorry, could you also check that you notify Stockton-on-the Forest Parish Council who are not members of YLCA and consequently do not get notified of these things? It's just a minor matter. They're in my ward and they're very well aware that they don't get information any other way. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, Chair. The position in respect of the role of executive members on the planning major committee and planning minor committee, or basically what is currently the main planning committee in the area planning committee, remains a live issue to be addressed by full council. So there does remain dispute as to whether executive members should sit on planning committees or not. What I've omitted is that I also need to include reference to Appendix 30, which is the major projects conflicts protocol, because depending on the decision of full council, that protocol will just have to be amended slightly at section 3. So it's 3.4, 3.5, 3.6 in terms of the role of executive members. So that needs to be amended. It's the final pages, it's page 681. 680, 681 is the final appendix in the Constitution. That will also, I do need to include in the covering report that depending on the decision that is made by full council, that wording in that protocol will also need to be amended. Which is, if I may just move on to other issues by way of update,
You may.
Chair. One document which has not been reviewed as part of this process is the Officer Code of Conduct. It was not appropriate to review the Officer Code of Conduct until Joint Standards Committee had reviewed the Officer Member Protocol. The Joint Standards Committee did review the Officer Member Protocol and have asked for some slight amendments to that at their meeting on the 24th of January. That has now been enabled us to trigger consultation with the trade unions regarding the content and the update of the Officer Code of Conduct. That document has not been substantially updated or reviewed since, from what I can gather, around 2016. There were some minor amendments undertaken and approved by this committee in March 2020, just before lockdown. But the consultation has now started with the trade unions in terms of updating that and making it much more relevant. And it will sit alongside the ethics statement as well, and also try and reflect some of the principles that are in the Member Code of Conduct as well, and the Officer Member Protocol.
Do you have any timeline as to when that might be completed?
Yes, I do. It's all really quite quickly. The aspiration is to ensure that all of these documents are finalised in good time for full council on the 24th of March. So subject to the views of this committee this evening, the current plan is that the Constitution, with the areas of dispute highlighted, will be presented to full council for determination and consideration in March. My final commentary, however, it relates to the introduction. I have started to draft an introduction, and as I've previously indicated, it's been quite a difficult document to read until we're more or less in this position, Chair. I would therefore invite the committee to consider that I can complete the introduction in consultation with yourself and the Vice Chair. And my final commentary would be that the final report that goes to full council, if I share a draft of that with yourself and the Vice Chair of this committee, prior to the publication of the full council agenda, subject to this evening's discussion as to whether the Constitution does go to full council in March. Chair, I'm conscious that there's a huge amount of paperwork in front of members, and I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Do you just want to make reference?
Public. Yes.
Sorry, do you just want to make reference to the planning committee title?
Well, I wasn't going to, because it only just got resolved.
Right.
So there has been a debate about what
but it is going to make it, it's going to be a material change to the well, not material, but it's going to be a significant amount of amendments to the Constitution.
There are around in the region of around 200 amendments that now need to be made to the Constitution, because there has been in the last 5 days or so, especially the last 48 hours, debate as to what the planning committees should be referred to going forward from March, subject to this evening's acceptance of the Constitution and full council's views in March. The planning area subcommittee is legally not an area committee, and it's legally not a subcommittee, and therefore it's not possible to keep calling it area planning subcommittee, because that is the wrong definition of that committee. After much toing and froing and significant consultation with the chairs and vice chairs of the two planning committees and various suggestions being put forward, the agreed position now is that main planning will be planning committee A, and area planning subcommittee, I'm sure I've said that the wrong way around, will become planning committee B. Those two now confirmed decisions mean that we are going to amend this entire document again approximately 200 times to reflect that that's what the two planning committees are going to be called, subject to. So if you spot some typing errors of A and B, please let me know, because there is far too many references to planning in the entire Constitution. But that has been the debate in full consultation with the chairs and vice chairs of the two committees, and that is the consensus of agreement, Chair, if I may.
Not with me. But, yeah.
Can I, obviously the public participant has indicated some comments. The comments that have been raised this evening are slightly different to the ones that I received early in January. The ones that I received early in January, the amendments had already been made. So the one, for example, the commentary that I received in January was that the article for relating to the terms of reference this committee did not have reference to independent persons, whereas the published version does. And so the comments that I've received this evening are slightly different, but I will take those away and consider it as we're doing all the other amendments
Yeah.
now in respect of planning in the Constitution. Chair, I'm happy to take, apologies, it's whistle start for such a big document, but I'm happy to take any comments, and I'm conscious that this document has been to committee in various
Innumerable
guises,
times.
a number of occasions. Chair?
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, the tripping off the tongue title of planning A and planning B. So, Councillor Webb.
I prefer planning A and planning 1. Then no one's, you know, junior to the other. I'm just saying, but no. Director of people. Could you just outline? You know, obviously that's going to need updating, but it is that. To be honest, that's probably going to more reflect the original document, I imagine, because essentially we're going backwards. Is that right?
You'd think that, but there is actually the scheme of delegation in the current constitution doesn't break it down into individual responsibilities of corporate director roles. So it's actually new amendments that we need to do. But when you look at Appendix 1, which is where the majority of the amendments are going to be taking place, and if you bear with me a moment, I'll just find the position, the place on it, the page numbers.
It starts on 155.
Thank you. It's page 211. So page 211, corporate director of people. We've already put a commentary in there that it may be subject to potential change because obviously we published this early January, mid-January. So therefore, everything has changed yesterday and today. What I can advise you is that having looked at it, it's quite easy to separate. So we'll make sure that the respective statutory responsibilities are broken down. So instead of wherever in the Constitution it says corporate director of people, it will say corporate director of children's and corporate director of adults, respectively, where that arises. Then going forward, we'll once appointed to in those positions, we'll just have to carefully consult with those two statutory officers just to make sure that they're comfortable with the phraseology and the terminology in the Constitution. And that may require, I hate to say this, a revisit at some point after March, once they're appointed, if there are any changes to be made. So every chief officer who's got a statutory responsibility has been consulted with, and therefore it's only fair that once appointed, they are consulted with in terms of their own statutory obligations. But more or less what you see here in pages 212, 213 will be broken down and reflected into the two roles. But throughout the Constitution, we've highlighted, preempted where SMU is. We were aware of being asked to make a decision.
Lovely, thank you. Are there any additional questions? Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. Can you explain to us, Janie, the sort of the reasoning around the issue? I'm on page 5 here, the role of executive members on planning, because I know this is something that is going to be taken forward to full council, but I would like to understand it more before it gets that far. Because it's my understanding at the moment that if there is a project that would mean that the council would be making an application for planning, that is voted on at executive. So I'm unclear as to why that's not being predetermined if you've already voted to say you support something happening. Because if I went to, I don't know, a local meeting in my ward and voted to say, hey, yeah, I think this development's a really great idea, I'm sure you would tell me that I was predetermined and I shouldn't then sit on planning for that matter. So I'm just a bit unclear about that. So any help you can give would be helpful.
So in law, executive members are entitled to sit on the planning committee, and actually the executive member or cabinet member in some councils with the responsibility for planning is also entitled to sit on the planning committee. There is nothing in law that prevents them from sitting on there. And from what I can gather, this council's had previous history of executive members sitting on planning committees for quite a long time. So it is a pattern. It's not a new phenomenon for City of York. The issue as to why this is dispute is that it was highlighted at a previous meeting of the executive, and the views that have been received from the cross-party group, particularly cross-party group, there is an area of disagreement about whether executive members should sit on planning or not. So I've highlighted it here. In order to address the conflict issue, what I've already referred to, so if you look at the appendix 30, so there is guidance at 3.5 on page 681, which is guidance to executive members that if they sit on planning committee going forward, then they need to be mindful of the conflict. The only person really who can determine whether they've got a conflict of interest or not is the actual member themselves. It's not for an officer to say they've got a conflict, it's for the member themselves. And that is in accordance with the provisions of the Localism Act. There's also local government association guidance to all members that's publicly available about the thought process that an elected member should have in terms of their approach to planning, their position on a planning committee as well. So there is quite considerable public guidance and probity around there. And the Planning Advisory Service as well also issues guidance to members around their roles and responsibilities and the issues around conflicts on planning. So from my perspective, it's determining the local choice of do executive members sit on there, and then depending on the full council decision, depends on the wording that we have in the various conflict documents.
Councillor Lomas, I think you've got a supplementary, and then I'll go to Councillor Webb.
Because that makes sense, and that is helpful. I think it makes it clearer. But I'm concerned about the wording then that's on page 5/6, because that doesn't follow for me, because it says they must consider whether they have an interest or a degree of involvement with the proposals, but that doesn't fit with my understanding of process, because if you voted to say yes, we should do X, whatever it is, then that is an involvement, isn't it? That's support for it going forward. Or if you voted to say no, I don't think we as the executive should do X, but it goes to planning anyway. Equally, you've already expressed a firm view about whether you think this thing should go ahead or not. So I just wonder if it needs to be clearer in the wording that degree of involvement would also be participating in a vote at executive on the project, because I think for me that was the bit that was missing really.
I'll look at that. For me, it's the local choice issue. Does the council want executive members on planning or not? And the answer to that determines how I word everything, really.
Thank you. Did you have a further supplementary? Because I've got a supplementary, if I may. You have a supplementary, yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'd back up what Councillor Lomas says. Whether we have a choice that it's executive members. If executive members are allowed to be on the planning, then I think we definitely need to say clearly, but if you have voted for something as part of the executive, you shouldn't take part, because there's no doubt of bias there. And I think that just needs spelling out in black and white. Otherwise, my position would be just keep it clean and say that we shouldn't have executive members on planning. Given the concerns this council has had very, very recently around members being allowed to decide for themselves whether they've got a conflict of interest or not, I think it would be safer and probably more prudent to just make it clear now and say executive members shouldn't sit on planning. Or even at halfway house, executive members shouldn't sit on any council application. Maybe that might be something.
In the final column, the appendix 17, the para 4.6, that is existing wording, and that is currently in the existing constitution. So On page 5, in the
Oh,
final
page
column,
5.
in the bold type, it says Appendix 17, para 4.6. And then it goes on. That is the wording which is in the current constitution and has been transposed into the revised draft constitution. So it's that wording that's actually in dispute. That if executive members are removed from planning, that comes out of the constitution. If they stay in, obviously I take on board your comments and we look at it and we make further reference to Appendix 30, which is the conflicts protocol, and also now the member code. And it also affects the training that we deliver as well, which is around the member code, the constitution itself, etc. So that is the current wording in the current constitution.
Councillor Lomas, supplementary.
Yeah, apologies, Janie, I might not have made myself clear. I was saying if, depending on, because this is a decision for full council, obviously if full council vote that executive members cannot sit on planning, then different conversation. But if they vote that they can, then I was saying, I think that wording needs some work to make sure it makes it crystal clear the circumstances in which an executive member sitting on planning should not participate. Because at the moment, I don't think that is very clear.
And just to sorry, if I may, paragraph 3.6, I think is the problem here, because it gives hints, it gives allusions. I don't think it gives the amount of clarity.
Apologies, Chair. Could you just, when we keep saying paragraph whatever,
oh, sorry,
can we just
page
say page numbers?
Page 681, paragraph 3.6. So this is Appendix 30. No, you're absolutely right. So it said, if an executive member who's deeply involved, for example, it's their project, should either not participate at executive if they're intending to sit on planning. However, if they do sit on executive and then voted in, it only says it may be difficult for them to demonstrate objectivity in dealing with an application relating to that development. They must consider whether they have an interest. Now, I'm just wondering whether that ought to be tightened up to say that if you do vote at executive and it's your project, essentially, because you are the exec member for that project, it is exactly what you were saying.
You are absolutely saying that, but
it's exactly what Councillor Lomas was.
I cannot, as a monitoring officer, I cannot force that because the Localism Act very firmly places the duty on the individual member. So I can give advice to exactly the wording that you've used, Chair, but actually it can be completely disregarded because the Localism Act places the duty on the member in question and not on the duty of the officer to insist, and I have no ability at all to remove someone or require someone to leave a meeting. I can only just give advice for consideration.
Okay, Councillor Lomas.
I simply don't understand how that can possibly be the case where paragraph 3.5 on page 681 says, where an executive member may have input into the master planning of a major project, blah, blah, they will not sit on planning major committee or committee A when it is determining an application in respect. So why can't we also say something like that in our constitution? It's not saying that the monitoring officer has to do something dramatic. It's saying our constitution says that if you have participated in a vote on something in executive, you will not sit on planning committee when it determines that application. Or if you want to sit on planning committee when it determines the application, you recuse yourself from executive. That's what we're saying needs to be in. It needs to be on that, in that section. It needs to be in the, I can't remember which section now, the bold bit comes from, but that one as well.
I just think that Councillor Lomas has hit the nail on the head, frankly. If it says it in one section, if it says it in one paragraph, how can the very next paragraph say something that only alludes to it? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think Councillor Mason's been waving it.
Oh, I'm
quite a
so
while.
sorry.
But can we as a committee propose that as a recommendation to full council, not to, but I think that as almost our position on this, I think that might be useful. Councillor
Mason.
But all I was going to say is, in Janie's defence, I'm sure she's gone round and round and round. And obviously, the reason we are at this point is because nothing could be agreed at the working parties and everything else. So I think it just needs to be a decision left for full council.
Yes, and I think that's right. And I did raise the point that Councillor Webb has raised, whether A&G should be actually having a position on these issues. Councillor Lomas.
I absolutely accept that it is a decision for full council. The problem is, if they are given the decision, the option that they can either go with executive members can't sit on planning, or go with executive members can sit on planning, but no tightening up of the wording, we end up in a position where some people might be forced to vote that they can't sit on planning because they're not content with where the wording is now. So what I'm suggesting is a position that would give us, in terms of our governance, a good outcome either way. That if the decision at full council is that executive members don't sit on planning, fine, that's the decision of council. But if they decide that they should, that we've got some wording in place that provides governance safeguards to prevent people from, as has happened, and we've been in meetings of planning committee where council applications have come forward and it is being questioned whether executive members should be voting on those applications, and they have gone ahead and voted on it. And everyone appeared to be collectively astonished that that could happen, because if you've already said as member of the executive, I'm really in favour of this, then you are predetermined, and you're even on film predetermining yourself. So we're saying that that's not an ideal situation, and that we should have something in our constitution that deals with it. So if the first plan, which is executive members can't sit on the committee, if that's not accepted by full council, then we have a second position which gives those safeguards and allows executive members to sit on the committee. That's what we're suggesting.
I'm not sure it's always going to be as clear cut as that, though. You know, I'd like to run, let's say I was part of a group and we thought, I'd like to have a cafe. I said, oh, and someone else draws it up the plan. And
can you speak up? Sorry.
I'm just saying, I don't think it's always going to be as clear cut as that. You might have an overall intention for something to happen. It doesn't mean when something comes in front of you that you think that's the right way to do it, or it's the right plan, or whatever else.
I'm sorry,
Councillor Fisher. Sorry, Councillor Fisher had his hand
I
up.
just want to respond to that, because we're not talking about those situations. We're talking about where it is a council application that has gone to executive, where executive have voted, yes, we're in favour of doing this major project. And when that comes to planning committee, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, yes. Can we go through the chair rather than have a debate across the table? Councillor Fisher.
I take exactly what you're saying, but the key point about this is you can express an aspiration for something to happen, but then you have to analyse as a member the national planning policy framework and local policies. And sometimes, I mean, if the person has been extremely closely involved, for example, in the design of the ring road and has worked with officers to promote that scheme, then it's perfectly credible, I agree, that that person should declare an interest, because they may have a predetermined position, they've worked on it and so on. But where they've been member of an executive, say if member for climate change, who says, well, I want to the library somewhere, I don't think they're necessarily predetermined on it. I think you have to leave it to the members to determine their level of predetermination.
Not convinced by that. Councillor Lomas and then Councillor Webb.
I'm specifically referring to situations where a decision to undertake a project has been made collectively by executive, with members of the executive voting either for or against that. And their vote either for or against at executive predetermines them on that matter, because they have already made a determination about whether that is a good or a bad thing. They may be voting against. And I think that in the example I gave, if I went along, if there was a development in my ward and I was invited along to a meeting and have been and have sought advice from Janie about it, and the advice always is that I must make sure I remain completely unpredetermined on the matter. And that means not expressing a view in favour or against. And I believe that a vote in favour or against is expressing such a view in favour or against.
Sorry, do you have a response to that?
There's a very big difference between expressing a principle for the desire something to be developed and actually expressing a view that the planning condition, the planning permission, should be approved. In other words, you can say there's an aspiration to develop the ring road, but not when you come to the planning committee, you have to consider the planning policy frameworks and whether the application conforms to those. So I think you're in a slightly different position.
Yeah.
I think this is a fight, a debate we should be having at full council anyway, personally.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I will take some further observations, but this is going to full council, and I think this is the main reason why it's going to full council, because there is just no consensus on this issue whatsoever. I'm going to go to Councillor Webb, and then I'll come back to you. Is that okay? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I think that the position that Councillor Lomas has outlined makes good sense. It's prudent, and I think it would generally help avoid problems that we faced around conflicts of interest. I think the position that an executive member can on one night say, this is a great idea, yes, let's go ahead, and then on the next night say, I'm not predetermined, is ridiculous and flies in the face of everything we've said about the PIR. And my point would be that, yes, it is going to full council. And I think from a governance point of view, the Audit and Governance Committee has to make a recommendation as to our position. And personally, I'd support what Councillor Lomas has said. And that's where I think we need to go now, Chair, is to say, look, what are we going to say to full council? Because, look, we've been debating this for months and months and months. Full council, in reality, are not going to have that.
I'm going to take Councillor Lomas, and then I'm going to draw this element to a close. Councillor Lomas.
It was just a question. Have the views of Howie Ainscough been sought about this matter? Because they obviously have been giving us lots of advice on conflict of interest and the member code of conduct and all things related to that. And I would be really interested to find out what they've said about it.
Yes, Chair, they have been asked, and their response was that the LGA is looking at this nationally, but there is no update on that as yet. And as you know, Howie Ainscough is also commissioned by the Local Government Association, because Howie Ainscough wrote the national code. And so that was their update.
Right, I'm going to draw this element to a close, but I'm going to have the final word on it. Oh, sorry, go on.
It's just a supplementary to that. So they don't have any view that might be able to help us in our consideration of this. They just think council should do nothing about it.
Because currently the legal position is it's local choice of councils if executive members should sit on planning or not. And in terms of the conflict of interest issue, that is something that the LGA is currently considering. So there is no national view yet. And Howie Ainscough are part of that LGA national consideration, but there is no formal update on that. So their answer has to be stuck with the legal position. Executive members can sit on planning.
Yeah, as I say, we are going to draw this to a close, and I think it's going to be a very interesting area of debate. My view, for what it's worth, is that paragraphs 3.5 on page 681 and 3.7 do give a very clear steer about when an executive member can and cannot sit on the planning committee, and I feel paragraph 3.6 should be tighter. That's my view, but we shall see where that goes in respect of the debate on the 16th March, 24th of, why do I always keep saying the 16th of March? I say it every single time.
I did ask that, can we, as an audit and governance committee, put a recommendation on our opinion of this? I think from a governance point of view, because I think there's a very real concern that there will be code of conduct complaints from members of the public about executive members sitting on their own applications, if you see what I mean. I think from an audit and governance point of view, we should be able to give a clear steer. I think it helps, it protects us, I think it protects yourself, Chair. So from are we going to do that?
It wasn't my intention that audit and governance would come with a specific position, because that would be, do you agree with the audit and governance recommendation? Whereas my understanding of how the Lord Mayor intends to take this item is there will be two choices, and it will be, do you agree with choice A or do you agree with choice B? Choice A being that no executive members sit on planning committee. Choice B will be executive members can sit on the planning committee. I still think paragraph 3.6, if option B is chosen, is still far too woolly, but that's just my view. Councillor Lomas.
So, Janie, can you confirm then, are you making any changes to that wording or not?
Yes, I will consider it. And obviously I've asked if I can work with the chair and vice chair in the formalisation of the report that goes to full council on behalf of the committee. So I can include the views, but from a legal perspective, the options are, and absolutely, I also have to listen to full council recommendations as well, because full council is also entitled to make some recommendations similar to your discussions as well, if they feel that there should be some caveats put in place, conditions, and that's depending on the debate that they've heard. So yes, I can put some draft wording together and share that with the chair and vice chair.
And I think we will share it with the rest of the committee as well. I think that would be appropriate. I'm just going to say one thing about when this does come to full council. Given how we all know full council operates, I would just ask you, in conjunction with the Lord Mayor, to ensure that there is sufficient time to debate these issues, because if this comes at the end of a very long agenda with motions and questions, and we're facing a guillotine, I want these issues to be fully debated and considered. I don't want it being truncated or going through on some sort of guillotine nod. So, are there any of the other items that Janie has flagged up in her report that do not have a consensus that we would like to we'd like to debate? So there's the item about decision making with joint standards and substitutes. That's one that we've already discussed. Article 7, substitutes for shall be appointed from within the same political group. We haven't discussed, but that is going to go to full council as well, because there was no consensus on that matter, and that's a matter that's exercised the chair of CSMC quite significantly. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. You did mention this earlier on, Janie. In reference to the public speaker's comments around independent members, which is section 9, I believe.
It is Article 9.
Yeah, Article 9, which is somewhere. Oh, hang on.
In terms of reference to the audit and governance.
There we are. About page 50 odd, something like that. 52. So the independent, the public speaker, the former independent member, Mr. Mendes, suggested 2 independent members for audit and governance, and 2 4-year terms. And I have to say, I can appreciate, being new to this committee in 2019, that is a sensible move, particularly the 2 4-year terms, and also 2 independent members, because, and I know it has proven difficult to find independent members, but I think that, you know, if you've got 2, I think that there's a strong chance we've got that support there. And then the final point was democratic oversight of the members of the remuneration panel. And as the public speaker mentioned those things, could Janie sort of outline in turn her rationale for not putting those points in, please?
Partly, we are awaiting the outcomes of the Redmond review, which makes specific stipulations around independent persons. So we are still awaiting that, which will formalise the position going forward. In terms of the term of office, you have to make a balancing exercise of, can you become too, I don't quite know how to say this, but you can be attached to a committee for a too longer period so that your view is not sufficiently objective. It becomes more subjective over time. So it's about making sure that there is that independent oversight and it is done in a timely manner, and that it doesn't become more of a norm and you lose the ability of the effective challenge. So that is in terms of opinion, but largely it is. We've heard from the Redmond review, it is going through the process. We're waiting for it. If you wish, we can put in 2. Doesn't alter the recruitment ability, because you can put 1 in, you can put 2 in. There is still an enormous difficulty to recruit, and the IRP does have to meet, because we're not able to pay anything in terms of a nominal fee, etc., without the IRP actually approving that and being justified that the role is sufficient to warrant any form of payment. And obviously payment is what attracts an applicant.
I've got Councillors Fisher and then Councillor Mason, and I will come back to you, Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. As I understand it, the Joint Standards Committee has independent persons. It has 2, and they can.
Can you speak up?
Sorry, I apologise. I've got a slight problem with the throat. The Joint Standards Committee has 2 independent persons, and they can serve 2 consecutive terms. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. It seems illogical that we have different terms of reference for the independent persons on joint standards and audit governance.
Yeah, the very alive position for Joint Standards Committee as well is that also both of those independent members have resigned, and obviously we can't recruit to those either. The Localism Act is quite clear that there's a sort of a different expectation of role for independent persons on Joint Standards Committee. Merely adopting what this council has already done for Joint Standards Committee, which is a long-standing arrangement. Normally you have actually 3 on Joint Standards, 3 independent persons in an ideal world on Joint Standards Committee, and that is to provide an extremely objective overview, bearing in mind the nature of the work that undertakes and the personality, etc., of all of the issues. I can put 2 in. That's absolutely fine. When we had the discussion and I wrote this, it was 1 from this committee, because this is a new addition to this article. So when we debated this, there wasn't reference to independent persons in the article. So this reflects the previous discussions of this committee.
Yeah, it was. Councillor Mason and then Councillor Webb.
Thanks. I think 2, and I think 2 terms. I think, 1, it's experience you lose within 4 years. You quickly gain something and then you lose it. And obviously, as the council changes every 4 years, having that continuous person potentially, is valuable. I think to have someone else's insight into what's gone on for the last 4 years. I think most charities have 2 terms. Most boards have 2 terms. I think it's fine. And actually, if we're struggling with recruitment, having someone for 8 years is probably easier than getting 2 people in 8 years.
Councillor Webb.
Yeah, I think this constitution is nothing if it's not meant to be aspirational. And I think I totally understand your concerns about recruitment, but we should make it clear that, yes, we would aspire to have 2 independent members on audit and governance. I would say that 2 4-year terms makes sense for exactly what Councillor Mason said. And I'd also say that more than 2 4-year terms would probably be wrong for the points that you've made, Janie, that actually you can then become a bit institutionalized. But yeah, and those two, for me, I'd have 2 independents and 2 4-year terms. On the democratic oversight of members of the remuneration panel, I'll admit I don't know a lot about that, and I was wondering if you could just give us a bit of detail.
Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on that particular issue, Chair, because my understanding of what Mr. Mendes said in his contribution, it was around democratic oversight of the way that we appoint members to the independent remuneration panel, which is on page 136 of our packs, Article 22.
136.
136 onto 137. So, and it just says full council appoints independent members to the panel. And I think the suggestion, I'm looking for a nod. Yeah, I think the suggestion was that we should have some more sort of oversight of the process. So not oversight of doing it, but oversight of what is the process of finding independent members for the independent
remuneration.
Yeah, that remuneration panel. I'm going to stop saying it now.
Change the title.
Yeah.
That's what you want to do.
It would be easier. So the IRP, which is actually, I've learned over years, it's actually easier to say for me. So Article 22 is Article 22 is actually the existing York arrangements for the IRP. So these are ones that I've discovered that weren't previously fully explained in the Constitution, but they're on the council's website. So this is what happens. The nuances around the appointment of members to the IRP, or the identification of members to the IRP, subtly changes with each council that I've experienced. So for some, it's applications that are received to the chief executive, for example, because these are people who are adjudicating on members' allowances. So you need to retain the independence. So it's an application process that is overseen by the head of HR with the chief executive, or in our case, the chief operating officer, overseeing the process, and then taking various amounts of references, etc., about the people and knowledge of the city, etc. Full council will always have the ability to veto a nomination or not, but the actual process is usually overseen by senior officers in accordance with HR procedures. That's what I'm used to. Have to admit though, IRP appointments you don't do very often because they don't sit very often as well. Just by way of information though, I do think that the York IRP needs to sit slightly more frequently than once a year.
Once a term.
Once a term, sorry. What I have previously indicated, I think, to this committee is that this constitution in itself, I believe, triggers a formal meeting of the IRP because there's a lot more clarity around different roles, responsibilities, formulation of the committees, and therefore they need to start that awareness raising of our more comprehensive published governance framework than what they've previously seen. I also need to meet with them as well to ascertain what their views are in terms of the evidence that they would need to consider members' allowances in readiness for May 2023. But the process is subtly different in each council, and it's usually overseen by the chief executive.
Thanks, Jenny. That's really helpful. I think it would be good to have something about the process in this article. So saying that it's done in line with HR guidance or whatever, and that it's overseen by the chief operating officer, because I think that would give confidence to members of the public that this is you know, an independent RP. I nearly walked into a trap then, didn't I? But I think that would give confidence if there was some, just some understanding that there is a process, that it's not just, I've picked.
So would you suggest that we bring this, that we bring this item back for further consideration, maybe after full council, or to be reviewed again, or will there be time?
Chair, if I may, it's simply the addition of another paragraph.
Okay.
Because the senior advisors to the IRP, when it meets, and myself and Debbie, it's the statutory officers in terms of mine is providing the evidence, Debbie's is providing the financial sort of accountability and the assessment of their views. But it's simply adding paragraph 6, which is the recruitment process is overseen by the Chief Operating Officer in accordance with the council's HR procedures. It is literally simply that. I'm quite happy just to amend that. I can share it by email, the amendment, rather than trigger another meeting.
I mean, there used to be maybe an informal agreement, and people who've got more length of service than I have, that a former councillor sat on the IRP.
There is a former councillor on York's IRP, but they have to demonstrate sufficient independence. So there has to be a period of time between when they ceased being a councillor to when they become an independent person. They have to be able to justify that they're coming effectively with clean hands. That they've not come with a pre-assumed view as to what they think it was, because so there has to be sufficient distance in time. And again, it's back to independence, because they stand in the shoes of the reasonable member of the public. So therefore, they have to give an independent overview, not use, for example, insider knowledge.
Right, that's fine. But should that be incorporated, therefore, in the Constitution?
It's quite heavily regulated, actually.
Is it?
So the requirement to have an IRP is heavily regulated.
Right.
And this is York's interpretation, but yeah.
Okay. Councillor Webb.
So it's just to confirm then, 2 independent members, 2 4-year terms?
Well, now this is the bit that I just wanted to clarify with us all. When you say 2 4-year terms, do you mean 2 electoral cycles? Or if somebody's appointed in the middle of a term, that would then potentially run them into a 3rd electoral cycle. If that's what we're saying, then I'm cool with that. I just want to get that clarified.
That might be more helpful to have people that don't always match up year to year, so you get some consistency.
Yeah.
2 electoral cycles.
No, not 2 electoral cycles. 2 4-year terms. So yeah. And the bit about 2 independent members or 1 independent member, Janie's absolutely right. When we did visit this on a previous occasion, we were just talking about the importance of having an independent member. We weren't talking about the importance of having 2 independent members until today. So I just want to canvass views on that. I've got Councillors Fisher and Councillor Mason, and then Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. I think 2 is ideal. I mean, obviously that is subject to recruitment, but it would be ideal if you could have 1 member who was a specialist in audit, and another was a specialist in governance to cover that. Plus the fact, of course, you can't always guarantee that the independent member one independent member will be able to attend all meetings. It puts,
No, I appreciate that. Councillor Mason and then Councillor Carr.
I think Councillor Fisher's ambitious. But on a serious note, I don't see why we don't offer some form of remuneration and why that can't be asked to be looked at the next cycle. I think that's the role of the IRP, because I think they are going to have to. I think they are going to have to seriously consider some form of payment for. And I don't think it's the monetary. I don't think everyone's after the monetary remuneration, but we don't just want someone who can afford to do it. I think no, absolutely. Give us a broader range of people that would be interested in it. Yeah, Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Chair. Janie, do we actually set qualifications for independent persons on standards committee? And if we do, should we not adopt the same procedure for ANG?
So for Joint Standards Committee, there is a requirement that they are independent and that they either work or live in the city, but they have to demonstrate independence. So they're not immediately a former councillor, for example. They do have to demonstrate that. And apart from being a good upstanding character in the community and subject to an interview in accordance with HR policies and procedures, and for example, and they're a council taxpayer and they're up to date on their council tax, That is it. In terms of going forward for this committee, the Redmond review is indicating that an independent person will have a financial background. I'm slightly nervous about Councillor Fisher's comments about could we ask for, because you start really putting boundaries on the pool of people who may be interested, and we want to keep it as broad as possible, I would imagine, to aid the recruitment process. The minute you start saying it's someone who's qualified in audit or someone who's qualified, how are you experienced in governance, for example, that is quite a hard thing to put some boundaries on. So I think we would limit the appetite for people applying even further.
I mean,
apologies, but that's just my view.
But Redmond, however, is recommending that for one of the independent members that they should have some financial background.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we've got the bones here of a proposal that in respect of Article 9, up to 2 independent members. So we can sit with one if only one applies, but if we have 2 suitable ones, and for 2 4-year terms, but not stipulating electoral cycles. Can I think I'll ask for a vote of a show of hands on this. Yeah, cool. Right. Are there any other points that members want to make in respect of the issues that are going to full council? And then I'm just going to ask Janie if she will run us through the process of how this is going to be brought, this whole constitution is going to be brought to full council. Sorry, yes, thank you. Sorry, I was looking at Janie, not at colleagues.
Just before we move on, one last question. Public speaker mentioned the embedding of Veritao as internal auditors in the constitution and questioned whether that was problematic essentially. Can you just give us a view on that, Jane?
So in the constitution, we're required to identify there who is our head of internal audit, and for us it is Max Thomas, who regularly attends this committee, and he happens to be the chief executive of Verito. He is also required to work in accordance with huge amounts of ethics in terms of his independence. So he is challenged by the shareholder committee as the chief executive of Verito, but you challenge him as an independent head of internal audit. So I can't not feature or identify where he is, because I need to be clear that he comes from Verito as the head of internal audit. He's actually the sort of it's a formal title of it. It's like the chief executive of audit, but under the auditing standards, but he is known as the head of internal audit.
Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, so I mean, I was really just checking that it won't cause a difficulty if our relationship changes at the end of the contract that we've got with Veritone.
I can tell you, absolutely wouldn't. So the discussion around the contract and the renewal of any arrangements with Verito is different to the constitution. If for some reason the council decided not to use the company it created for its internal audit, would be a bizarre decision, but it could decide to do it, then the constitution would be amended to reflect that. So whoever it then appointed, that would then be reflected in the constitution, or it could bring it back in-house and have a head of internal audit.
Can I just ask you, Jenny, just to explain Appendix 5, page 7, scrutiny procedure rules. Should the anticipated time estimate, which is provided as a guide only, be listed as 20 minutes or 30 minutes? Can you explain what this relates to and where it's come from?
Yes, during the call-in, there is now a set procedure which is detailed within the constitution, which is previously been absent. As part of that set procedure, the call-in signatories speak first, members ask questions, followed by the executive member responding to the call-in. Members then ask questions, and following that stage, members then have a debate on the call-in. And we try to offer a guide so that anybody who's watching or attending as member of the public or officers, members have a time estimate of, does it last for like 5 days or does it last for 10 seconds? The debate of members following on from hearing from the call-in signatories and the executive member, it is that time limit, and it is just an estimate only. It's been suggested by Councillor Crawshaw that it should be 20 minutes. It's been suggested by other chairs of scrutiny that it should be 30 minutes. And because there's no consensus of opinion, we've put it in. It's not
Right.
a rigidly stuck to, it's just an estimate for anybody reading the Constitution wanting to know what procedure we follow, so that because everything else has got a time limit to it. So for example, the call-in signatories get 10 minutes, the executive member gets 10 minutes in response. So it's the role of the committee, how long would they be expected to debate? In practice, it's probably nearer 10 minutes. It's probably much shorter. It depends on the topic of the call-in.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful clarification. Was there ever an issue raised about public participation and whether councillors should be incorporated within the overall 30 minutes for public participation, or should be classed separately to give the public more opportunity to speak?
That issue has not been raised as part of the review of the Constitution, so I've not been asked to put any clarity around that issue.
Right, okay, that's fine. Great. So I think that's covered all the ones. Should there be reference to a vice chair in Article 8? That was no consensus. So how's this going to be done when it comes to full council?
So Chair, following on from today, as I've already indicated, I need to finalise the introduction.
Yeah.
Because I've always indicated that that is the last document that I could write, because I don't know what I'm writing until I've kind of got very close to the end of your views.
Yeah.
So I do need to finish writing that, and with the committee's indulgence, get that circulated to yourself and the vice chair for commentary. I need to put the full report together for full council, and obviously I've indicated that I'd share that with yourself and the vice chair. In terms of the order of the full council agenda, I can speak to the Lord Mayor, but it's the Lord Mayor's gift to determine the order of full council agenda. So obviously I'll raise it with him and share your views, but it is the Lord Mayor's gift as to how he wishes to prioritise the agenda for full council in March.
I understand.
Must admit, that's quite a long way away for the Lord Mayor.
Well, yeah,
that
it is for him, but not for me.
That discussion won't happen until much nearer the time, until we've got some insight as to how big or not the agenda is going to be in March.
Sure. Councillor Webb.
I'm sure he's got many ribbons to cut between now and then, but could I just suggest that because there's the different bits that are contentious, I'm sure they're for different reasons. Will they be taken separately or together?
Separately.
They have to be taken separately because each requires a vote.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Great. Now then, if that's the end of that, are there any recommendations that you want us to make on this? No. Yeah, apart from it goes to full council. And we are happy that this version with the contentious elements in it, as adapted. Councillor Lomas.
I think it's quite clear from the discussion we're not. And there was a request to take a view of this committee to make a recommendation to full council or not, which you declined. So no is the answer to that, I guess.
Right. But the question then is, do you want further debate on it? Because we do have a meeting in March. Or would you rather that this did not go to full council in March? Because that will require a vote. Yes, you can.
I feel I need to comment on that as the monitoring officer, and Debbie may need to comment as well. The longer that it delays, the longer that a revised constitution delays going to full council, the harder it is to demonstrate evidence of compliance with the public interest report recommendations, which is what Mark Kirkham alluded to earlier in terms of delivery of it. In terms of the governance perspective to support the accounts that Debbie's just indicated she's now going to start writing for this year. From a governance perspective, you need a clean year of governance, and that's usually from April to the following March. If it goes to council in March, that can hopefully start a clean governance year from the April, but it further delays and it further calls into question the VFM assessment and qualification. And as the monitoring officer, I feel I just need to give the opinion that I would strongly recommend that this constitution goes to full council in March, because we do need to be showing some evidence of complying with the terms of the public interest report, and there's only so far that officers can go, and that's my only nervousness. To be fair, I need to say it, but that's my only nervousness, because the duty on providing the evidence of compliance rests with myself and Debbie, and the longer that this remains draft, the harder it is to show that evidence.
Councillor Lomas and then Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Janie. Completely agree. We definitely need to get this to full council. I do find it difficult, however, that the reason why we desperately need to get this to full council in March is to show our progress against the action plan resulting from the PIR. The PIR that in large part relates to issues with declarations of interest of members. And the issue that we're stuck on with this is about declarations of interest of members. And I think it's crucial that we get that right. And I'm not prepared as a member of the Audit and Governance Committee to say I am happy for this to go to full council, which is the question asked, not should it, but am I happy as a member of Audit and Governance? Because I think there are some deficits in relation to declarations of interest, and I hope that it's understandable why we might feel particularly focused on declarations of interest issues, because that's the reason why we have this pressing need to do these updates. I know there are other reasons to do the updates, because we need a constitution that works and is functional, but there is a pressing need for it because of the PIR action plan. And so I am not happy as a member of Audit and Governance Committee to leave this matter to be just absorbed at full council with all of the pressures that we've all recognised there will be at full council to just get through it, vote on it, done. Especially if there's a heavy agenda that evening. And I feel that we should either make a recommendation from this committee or we should flag in some way to full council that we believe there is a governance issue here that needs addressing.
Can I make a suggestion then that you make a proposal and that we vote on that?
I think Councillor Webb made the proposal earlier.
Hours ago.
With the wording of what?
I can't remember, it was that long ago, but my proposal was, as we talked about, and I am sort of trying to remember quite clearly where we were, as I say, about an hour ago, was around the fact that we had two choices. We either suggested that we said that executive members should not sit on planning, or we said that if full council was minded to allow executive members to sit on planning, that the wording in paragraph 3.6, I think, was tightened up, and that wording would fall to chair, vice chair in conjunction with monitoring officer. And as part of my proposal speech, I think that I'd just say that I am also massively uncomfortable with the idea that, you know, doing this solves the PIR problem. And we've constantly referred to that, and it's constantly been referred to over the last few months, because it clearly doesn't, particularly if we're still having these arguments about conflicts of interest and things like that. So that will be my recommendation as I've outlined. Thank you, Chair.
The monitoring officer has just, I will come back to you, Councillor Lomas, but she asked me before you started speaking whether she could.
So just reading the public interest recommendations, Chair, as they've been repeated by Mazars in the report earlier this evening, which is, it's also, yes, it is about conflicts of interest, but it's also about offering more clarity on schemes of delegation. Appendix 1 is now almost 100 pages long. It's virtually non-existent in the current constitution. And the longer that we go on without a more in-depth, detailed constitution, the more I have to try and rely on fewer words and trying to not work on the lack of clarity, trying to work on the lack of clarity here. It's also about all of the appendices as well. And there's a lot of appendices now included, which give members and officers a lot more clarity on conflicts of interest. And until they're adopted by full council, I can't really enforce those anywhere. And the whole point, the evidence that we have to show is that we're making strides in actually delivering a governance framework which is fit for purpose. And it is arguable as to whether the current constitution is fit for purpose for much longer. But it's also, as the LGA said, about embedding the new procedures, embedding and changing the culture and attitude towards ethical governance, which is code of conduct, and the formal governance arrangements, which is what this committee has got oversight. And for me, the constitution has to be that starting point, because we need that baseline of detailed transparency and clarity to officers and members and those who approach us, public, partners, stakeholders, the government, of Mazars, for example, the LGA, of this is, we don't go behind that. This is our starting point and we build from this. I've already committed as well that there's a 6-monthly review across officers and we feed back in. We've built in technical ability for Debbie and I to do minor changes so that we remain legally and financially compliant. And there is a commitment to do an annual fitness for purpose test for this committee. So it will never be this challenging ever again, but a fit for purpose test means that the Audit and Governance Committee is never going to be far away from the Constitution like it previously has been. It is going to be a constant reminder in the work plan that it has to fit in somewhere. So once we've done all of this work, it's not really going away. And likewise, Joint Standards Committee have completely overhauled their terms of reference and their procedures, and they need approval by full council as soon as possible, because to be fair, members of Joint Standards Committee are currently limping along with a new code and old procedures, and the two are not really meeting very well in the middle. So for me,
I don't think anybody's
ticks a lot of boxes.
I don't think anybody's arguing with any of those points, but I will go to Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair, because I didn't disagree with anything that you'd said, Debbie. Janie. What I did say was there is a specific issue that is in contention that we haven't dealt with here. And unless we can do that, we're going to be kind of going around in a circle. And I absolutely accept the need for this to go to full council and to do that as quickly as possible. But there is an issue, and the proposal was that we just clarify in that paragraph 3.6 that where an executive member has expressed a formal opinion by voting on a matter, they should recuse themselves from dealing with that on planning committee or vice versa. And I think that is a simple clarification that could be made if it is the will of full council that executive members continue to sit on planning committees. So I think that is a simple clarification that should be made. And I think that would strengthen our constitution in relation to matters of conflict of interest, which were key in the PIR.
So we've got a proposal. I'm taking it you're seconding Councillor Webb's proposal. Sorry? But I'm going to put it to the vote that there should be a revision to paragraph 3.6, as has been proposed and seconded.
I think I need to know what the revision can be before
I can clarify in very simple.
Yeah, she.
In very simple terms, it is, if executive members can sit on planning committee, if that's what full council determines, then on any council application that goes before planning committee, I think it will be A, all of them are unable to participate in the planning committee for that particular application.
Unless they recuse themselves from the vote at executive on the matter.
Yeah, which is what 3.5,
like
which is essentially
3.5.
what that section says for 3.5.
Yeah. So that's a proposal. Are you happy with that? The wording that Jenny's just basically reaffirmed the points that Councillor Webb just made. So that's what I'm going to ask us to vote on. Is everybody satisfied that they've understood what it is that I'm asking you to vote on? Yes? Right. All those in favour of the amendment as proposed, raise your hand. Against? So we've also got abstention.
Because most of the planning applications, in fact, every planning application that the council runs for itself has got to be somehow in the public good, in a sense, because it's always going to be a democratically elected either executive or planning committee that actually approves it. And I can't think of any application that would be promoted by the council, which would be to the detriment of the local authority. I just can't see that. And therefore I accept Councillor Lowmaster's concerns, but I just don't see the massive conflict.
So you're abstaining?
I'm going to abstain because I'm just...
So we now have a split vote, 3 for, 3 against, chair's casting vote. I vote in favour of the amendment. So the amended wording, as you outlined, will go to full council. Okay? Right. In which case, are members now satisfied that this matter, that this constitution goes to full council on the 24th of March? I must have something on the 16th of March. I don't know what it is. Yeah, I'll see you at the racecourse. It might be that. So, all those in favour? Yeah, right, going to full council. Final agenda item, because I don't believe we've got any urgent business, is the action plan, the work plan. Are there anything that that either of you two want to add, change?
Chair, given that you've just indicated that the constitution goes to full council in March,
Yeah.
Review of the constitution is currently an item on the work plan for the 9th of March.
Yeah. Do you want to take that out?
Yeah.
Or do you want to send us the final wording?
Well, I'll be contacting you in between
of course you
times
are.
anyway.
Of course you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So, if there are no additional urgent business that I'm not aware of, and I'll call this meeting to a close. Thank you very much, everybody. 7:45.